Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this lab talk developed by the Direct Care Workforce Strategy Center, made possible through support from the Administration for Community Living. Lab talks highlight high-value topics identified by states, national partners, and subject matter experts. Each session distills lessons learned, practical strategies, and emerging practices from the field into a short, on-demand module designed to support states and stakeholders working to strengthen the direct care workforce. Before we begin, here are a few quick notes about today's recording. All viewers will see an ASL interpreter on the screen. To access captions, press the closed captions or CC button on the video. Where possible, if a particular resource or dataset is mentioned, a link is included below. If you experience any technical issues when accessing this video, please reach out to Direct Care Workforce at ncoa.org. Thank you again for joining us. Let's get started.
Hi, my name is Molly Morris, and I am with the Self-Direction Center, recording this in February 2026. And I am just thrilled to join you today to talk specifically about self-direction in focus as we're thinking about direct care workforce strategies in general. It's really, really important when looking at self-direction to think about it a little differently than the broader field of home and community-based services. So I'm excited today to talk to you more about that and get you thinking about what's going to work well in a workforce context to serve self-direction programs. So today I'm going to briefly tell you just a little bit about the Self-Direction Center where I work. I want to level set with some national trends on self-direction, make sure we all understand the basics about self-direction. So some of the program fundamentals that I think are essential to understand in order to work through workforce strategies. And then I'm going to talk about what all of this means in a workforce context and give you some key actions, some key takeaways to be thinking about to improve workforce strategies in a self-direction context. So the Self-Direction Center, we are a national nonprofit that is entirely focused and dedicated to supporting and promoting self-direction as a model. So we're actually relatively new. We launched publicly in May of 2025 as a national nonprofit, but our work as an organization is built on decades of work that have passed hands from different organizations, really a body of work that's about advancing self-direction across the United States, harkening back to, you may be familiar with the cash and counseling demonstration and evaluation research that helped provide a randomized controlled trial to show how effective self-direction is as a model. As an organization, we really focus on centering people with lived experience self-directing, as we think their perspective is integral to really advancing this model and understanding how to help it work better. But we also work to bring all different stakeholders who care about self-direction, who work in self-direction. That includes state administrators, financial management services providers, case managers, etc. We want to create spaces to bring everyone together to really think about how can self-direction work well. We do this by building community, providing education, supporting advocacy, and advancing research. With all that said, let's talk a little bit big picture with self-direction. So this started out really as more of a pilot model in, the 80s, 90s. I mentioned the cash and counseling demonstration and evaluation. Once that research took place to show there is this evidence base for the model, growth of self-direction really took off. You had CMS, creating multiple pathways for people to self-direct, and states really took up the model. So as of 2023, we had documented 1.5 million people self-directing. There is a national inventory of self-direction programs that takes place every 3 years. It's historically been in conjunction with the AARP state long-term scorecard. So every 3 years for well over a decade, there's been research tracking the growth of self-direction. And what's really interesting to note is that from 2019 to 2023, there was a larger than typical increase in self-direction enrollment. And, it really seems that the COVID-19 pandemic really accelerated that growth. The prior 3-year interval only saw 17% increase. So there's always been steady growth, but you may be among many of the folks out there who have seen more and more people self-directing. And it is that much more important that we really look and understand specifically how self-direction works so we can develop strategies that work for it. I'll also note that all 50 states have some type of self-direction program or offering, but it may be very limited to specific populations or specific areas of the state. So not necessarily every state has self-direction in every area for every population. So with that said, I want to ground us in some basic principles of self-direction because, again, when we're thinking about how do we solve for workforce crisis issues, you have to really understand how these programs work. So self-direction programs can include one or both of these models of self-direction that I'm going to talk about. Most self-direction programs we see do have employer authority, and that describes the ability of people who self-direct within the model to hire and supervise their own workers. So they are, legally the employer. So when we're thinking about workforce strategies, they are the employer. So we need to engage with them in that role as we think about strategies for workers. Further, many but not all self-direction programs also have budget authority to some degree. This allows participants in the program to have control over the funds that fund their supports. So in many cases, this means setting wages. It can even mean purchasing supports, goods and services that also meet their person-centered plan goals. Now, I think it's really helpful to understand if you have budget authority in the self-direction programs you're working with, and also the extent of that budget authority. Some budget authority models, participants are able to set their workers' wages, but within a very specified range of wages. It might not be a very broad band of wages. Those wages might be very similar to what is offered in an agency setting. There may be more flexibility or more limitations compared to agency wages. That's all really important to understand because, again, that's going to influence workforce strategies. And then, more flexible budget authority, the participant is really going to be able to look across their entire budget and say, you know what, I have a lot of discretion over what I can pay my workers. And I'm going to make the choice to say, get fewer hours so that I can pay higher wages and retain my workers. I've talked to a lot of participants who've done that in states that allow it. So again, the strategies that can be utilized to nurture the workforce are going to be different depending on what employer authority and budget authority really look like in the program that you're working with. And if you think that you could make some changes to your program, this might be a place to start to help influence workforce issues in a different way than maybe you've thought about before. Now, another really essential piece of self-direction is when someone chooses to participate, they're taking on quite a lot of responsibility. As I said, they're typically serving as the employer, which means they're also really taking on responsibility for recruiting, hiring, supervising. And sometimes people step into these roles with some experience being an employer, but more often than not, they don't have that experience. And I think it's very relatable that any one of us, if you're stepping into a self-direction program, you'd really need support in order to be an effective employer to understand what you're doing. So CMS requires that self-direction programs offer two primary supports. information and assistance, and financial management services. And again, this can look different state to state, program to program, and how these primary supports are structured is also really integral to workforce strategies. Information and assistance can look different, again, state to state. Sometimes this is a support that's provided by case managers who are also doing a lot of other work outside of this information and assistance role. Sometimes it's provided by a support broker or a support coordinator, someone in a role that's separate from the case manager. But regardless of if it's a case manager or a separate role, CMS says we have to have somebody really coaching the participant on their employer role, teaching them how to do things like recruit, supporting them to think through strategies, being there with the spending plan development, helping them navigate program rules, and just being there for ongoing problem solving because at the individual level, they are really having to figure out who are going to be the best workers for me. How am I going to find them? And then how am I going to be a good supervisor, a good employer so that I can retain these workers in the long term? I'll talk a little bit more later about challenges, but I want you to keep in your head that information and assistance is a really critical area to be troubleshooting and looking at and thinking about when we're trying to strengthen workforce strategies because they are helping that person understand their role as an employer. Also, really essential is financial management services. So, this is the role of an entity or sometimes multiple entities in a state that is helping to take on some of the real challenging parts of being an employer, right? They're handling payroll and tax compliance, cutting worker paychecks, account management, spending and budget monitoring, really a lot of the technical, financial, legal, compliance related issues of being an employer, they are helping to take care of. And again, this role makes a real difference in terms of the end experience of the direct care workforce, of the participant. So, this is another area to really look at to understand, is financial management services operating effectively in our state? Common issues we hear might be delays in enrollment, cumbersome processes. If there is only one financial management services provider, you don't have that competition in the system. And if participants are having issues, they may not have anywhere to turn. Conversely, if you have many FMS providers, there might be real differences for participants from FMS provider to FMS provider. These are all, again, important parts of diagnosing how can we make our program operate better so that ultimately workers are secure and having a good experience and participants are getting what they need. And a couple of important distinctions in self-direction that I also just want to call out. And I will say across the board, there can sometimes be a tendency to, when the state is coming up, not just workforce strategies, but any kind of policy decision that's made for HCBS or home and community-based services programs in general, sometimes special consideration for self-direction is an afterthought as opposed to proactively thinking about how self-direction is different. And so that's what I really want to continue to challenge you to do today, is to be really thinking about, as I look at workforce strategies in general, what does this mean really for self-direction? So workforce implications are a real critical difference in self-direction. And I've already said this, but the care recipient is the employer. And a couple notes related to this. So CMS does not require outside worker training in self-direction. We've heard a lot that participant employers really value the ability to control who trains their workers and how. And any training strategy should really be designed as an opt-in option and developed with their input. So, just some examples I've heard over the years is that, for people who self-direct and are hiring their own workers, sometimes there are trainings that the state or the FMS is asking their worker to complete that may or may not be relevant to their unique use case. My One of my colleagues, Erica Andre, self-directs in Wisconsin, and she'll talk sometimes about CPR training requirements. Well, the nature of her disability, traditional CPR is actually really dangerous for her. So when her workers are required to do a traditional CPR training, you can imagine that that's pretty frustrating for everyone involved, right? So really thinking through how can we leverage the fact that self-direction allows for the participant to train their own workers and what that can mean for ensuring efficient, easy onboarding processes. And also, I think that I've also heard from participants that there is real value in having training available that they can share with their workers. But it's really important that there's stakeholder engagement with self-directing participants as these types of trainings are developed so that they can provide feedback on what's most helpful. I've definitely heard a big barrier can be required trainings, particularly required trainings before workers start. This can cause issues with delaying the participant's employee getting started, which can then, I've heard stories of employees actually walking away because it was just too cumbersome to get started. So I flag this so you can really think about what this might mean in the context of workforce issues. Also, self-direction does broaden the pool of potential workers. It often allows for hiring of family members, and it can offer really a meaningful advantage in tight labor markets. Instead of at an agency level, recruiting workers that really identify as being in the direct care workforce, being open to working with anyone, for self-direction, an individual person can really recruit people in their community, maybe a neighbor, a friend, someone they've met at a restaurant, out in the world, but someone who connects with them on an individual basis. And recruitment in that context really looks different. And it does make available more people who might, not think of themselves as someone who'd normally be in the direct care workforce, but hey, I really like my neighbor and I'm happy to work for him. So thinking about that, it does broaden the workforce. But also, on the flip side, this doesn't mean that self-direction is immune to the workforce crisis. We certainly hear some, states and programs really leaning into self-direction because of this broadening of the workforce. And yet, we still hear from participants in a self-direction context that it can be very hard to recruit workers, even at the individual level, particularly, low wages are low wages. That challenge exists no matter what. And related to this, self-direction should be an informed, affirmative choice. Again, the care recipient is the employer. This is a big responsibility. It should not be a default that lands on people because there aren't providers that have the capacity. So whether someone chose self-direction freely really has a direct impact on how workforce outcomes are going to look down the road. Because you can imagine, and we hear about this, that there is a lot of pressure on people to go straight to self-direction because the workforce crisis is so difficult, because providers are having trouble. But if a person doesn't want to take on the role as an employer, isn't prepared to do that, they're going to have a really hard time stepping into that responsibility. So these are all issues that I'd really encourage you to be thinking about. And continuing on with workforce implications, there's some kind of ongoing themes I've seen in states that I just want to call attention to. I've already mentioned this, but again, workforce shortages still affect self-direction. It's not automatically insulated. it might be affected differently. So it's really important to dig in and understand what this looks like in self-direction. That low uptake when people feel pushed into self-direction rather than choosing it is a real issue to think about. Also, case managers may lack confidence or training to present self-direction consistently and positively. They play such an integral role in sharing the option of self-direction. I've heard of some programs where I talk to case managers and they say, well, I just don't think self-direction is run very well. There are a lot of delays. When I send someone to the program, I have concerns about it. And the way they handle that is they don't recommend self-direction to people. Case managers are a really great access point for information on any issues that might be happening in the self-direction program because they're seeing it on the ground. It's also really important that people who are eligible are hearing about the option and they're hearing about it in a consistent way. Another workforce related theme is really, we often hear that restrictive background check requirements, for example, fingerprinting that takes a lot of time and effort, can really deter workers and slow onboarding. So I flag this so you can really look at and think about, are we creating more barriers than necessary? In some systems, I've even seen the cost of the background check actually lies with the participant, and they may not be able to afford that. That may present challenges, but really scrutinizing whether or not, and this involves talking to people who self-direct to really understand how are our onboarding requirements for workers impacting this process. Because again, I have heard from participants that they actually go through all the work of recruiting a worker, but then the onboarding process is very lengthy and causes issues. I'll also say some self-direction programs, you know, really allow for the participant to make the ultimate choice on whether or not the background findings have influenced whether they want to hire that person. An example might be someone is hiring a family member. They have a drug charge from 15 years ago. This person already lives with them. They trust them. It kind of doesn't make a difference what happened in the background check. This is something important to think about as we consider the limited workforce. Do we really want to create a barrier in that kind of circumstance? I mentioned earlier the role of information and assistance. And if this is underdeveloped in your program, or if this is overly complex, it really leaves participant employers without what they need, without that adequate coaching to be an effective employer. The information and assistance role is really a place to provide that one-on-one support to get creative about recruiting, about finding workers in a different way, helping someone really think about who's in my circle that I know, what places do I frequent where maybe I could put up an ad, or what is specific to my community where I could find workers. This is a really critical place where if information and assistance is strong, if it's whether it's support brokers or case managers, they're well trained, well prepared, well resourced, it's going to then influence participants' ability to do that recruitment. I'll also just note that nationally, there's very little comparable data that exists on the self-directed workforce as compared to the broader home and community-based services workforce, which means that you don't necessarily have a clear view into what's going on. So really thinking about, what data do we have access to about self-directed workers in terms of turnover, in terms of how long it takes to recruit workers and bring them on board. These are really important variables that, starting from a high level, really asking yourself, are we collecting the data that we need to collect so that we can diagnose the issues in the workforce space for self-direction? All right, just a few more workforce implications, themes from states. Um, in a workforce space, we hear a lot about worker registries. From the self-direction side, I've really heard mixed results on this. And what I've heard most often from folks that aren't having a good experience using worker registries as a participant employer is often that um, they find someone on a registry, they call them, and the person says, "Who is this? How did you get my number?" Or phone numbers not working, things being out of date. So, worker registries being very up to date is important. And I also think stakeholder engagement with participant employers in self-direction is going to be important so that these worker registries are designed with their needs and their unique perspectives in mind. And that doesn't always happen. Again, sometimes the worker registry is designed for HCBS as a whole without doing that due diligence to think about what does this mean? What does this look like in self-direction? I referred to this a little bit earlier, but in different states and programs across the country, we see pay disparities, and it can go in either direction between agency directed and self directed workers. In some cases, we hear, again, because that budget authority flexibility, self directed workers are able to get paid much higher wages than an agency directed. And then the reverse is sometimes true. Sometimes there's been a lot of great advocacy on the agency side for higher wages that doesn't apply to the self-direction program. This is just a place to look and troubleshoot and understand, are there disparities and how is that playing out in terms of worker access, creating competition between the programs that's impacting one or the other from recruiting workers? It's a dynamic to really think about. Also, the availability of worker benefits for self-direction workers varies significantly throughout the country. At the end of this presentation, I share a link to a reference of a paper that was done just over a year ago by Applied Self-Direction, talking to FMS providers specifically about 25 states where they have some form of worker benefit available to self-direction workers. And it gives you a sense of what's out there, what possibilities might be, everything from sick leave to access to health insurance. But some of these findings show that FMS providers tend to say they see and believe there is an impact from having some kind of worker benefit. But I encourage you to look at that and really think about what kind of benefits might be possible in a self-direction context. And then finally, peer support can really dramatically increase uptake and success of self-direction. And what we really mean by that is if you are self-directing, it makes perfect sense that talking to someone else who has experience self-directing, who's also recruited workers in the same community, who's been there, done that, had a lot of interesting strategies, that can be such a helpful resource. Again, looking back at information and assistance, is there an opportunity to have more people who have lived experience in those information and assistance roles? Or are there other programming opportunities to help build those connections, give those spaces for self-directed employers to learn from each other? So, some key actions that I would leave you with. What now? One, just really strongly recommend that you look at deepening stakeholder engagement, specifically in a self-direction context. In self-direction, the participant is the employer. So they have an essential leadership role. Talking to them, hearing from them, engaging with them regularly is going to help paint the fuller picture of what the workforce challenges are in a self-direction context. And working with them to address those challenges is going to be essential. Also, coordinating across all stakeholders and partners. It is not uncommon for us to hear that there is dysfunction in self-direction programs because of a lack of role clarity, say, between the state, the FMS provider, and a managed care organization. There are cumbersome, ineffective enrollment processes because stakeholders and partners aren't working with each other well. This all has a downstream effect on workforce, on the experience a potential worker is having with onboarding, on the ease with which a participant is having with recruiting. It's really important to kind of diagnose how well are we coordinating across all these stakeholders in the self-direction ecosystem. I mentioned this before, but really look at starting to collect and analyzing workforce data. What could we begin to do now to better understand later what the self-direction workforce looks like so we can treat the correct problem in the system? Again, examine and strengthen information and assistance. This is the role of coaching someone in their employer role. And if we can strengthen that, help the participant employer be more creative, more well equipped to recruit, to retain, that's going to have an impact. And then also really reviewing and strengthening your benefits framework. Do self-directed employees have any kind of benefits? What can you provide? What can you build towards? And really thinking about that as an essential strategy. Not to mention being able to raise wages across the board, but I think that goes without saying. So related to today, I've got a couple references linked in the slides from today. The Self-Direction Center is the organization where I work. If you go to our website and sign up for our newsletter, you can get regular emails, including our weekly Self-Direction in the News, where we share a lot of resources, workforce trends that are really pertinent. I referred in the presentation to the 2023 National Inventory of Self-Direction Programs, if you want to look at that to really better understand the national landscape. A report was done at Applied Self-Direction about two years ago called Bridging the Gap: Insights into Strengthening the Self-Directed Workforce. And there's a lot of feedback here directly from participant employers on their experience in self-direction, ideas for improving challenges. And there's great materials there too for coaching participant employers on giving them ideas for recruiting workers. And then finally, the paper I already referred to from Applied Self-Direction, Worker Benefits and Self-Direction, a survey of 25 states done with financial management services providers. So with all that said, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to get to talk about this topic today. If this sparked anything, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is Molly, MOLLY, at selfdirectioncenter.org. And again, if you check out our website, you can get more updates and get more information on an ongoing basis about self-direction.
Thanks to our speakers who shared their expertise in this recording. Thank you for joining us for this lab talk. We hope the strategies and examples shared today offer practical support as you continue strengthening your state's direct care workforce. This recording, along with related resources and materials, will be available on the DCW Strategies Center microsite. We encourage you to explore other lab talks and modules in the series for additional guidance and promising practices from the field. If you have any questions, need assistance accessing materials, or would like to learn more about technical assistance opportunities with the Strategy Center, please reach out to directcareworkforce@ncoa.org. Thank you again for watching, and we look forward to having you join us for future lab talks and other resources.